The Power and the Glory by Henry Graham Greene. It's a part of 20th century British literature. The Power and the Glory deals with the existential dilemma of a persecuted priest in Mexico and describes his life of debauchery and immorality. The characters in this novel are the priest. Greene's characters are mostly types and not individuals, and therefore characters such as the whiskey priest and the lieutenant are unnamed as they represent the priests and policemen of their kind. The whiskey priest is the protagonist and the character upon whom the novel's most important moral questions center. The lieutenant, a believer in the law, a representative of the power of the state, in contrast to the priest who is committed to God's glossy, driven by an obsessive hatred for the Catholic Church, and the priest's pursuer. The Jefe, the chief of police and the lieutenant's boss, corrupt in body and soul. He is the quintessence of the corrupt police force in the country. He suffers chronic toothache and is not as concerned about the capture of the priest as his crusading subordinate, the lieutenant, and is content to play billiards and delegate authority. The mestizo, a person the priest meets about halfway through his journey at a place called Candelaria, and who continues to reappear throughout the last half of the novel. Captain Fellows, a benign, if ineffectual, plantation owner who tries to remain cheerful and optimistic in the face of difficult times and an isolated existence. Coral Fellows. Coral is a young American girl whom the priest meets early on in the novel when she discovers him hiding on her family's property. Mrs. Fellows, Coral's mother, and a neurotic, hysterical woman who confines herself to her bed out of fear of death. Zoan, a young man whom we encounter in the novel only through the stories that are told about him. He lives his life in perfect piety and generosity and faces death with bravery and perfect composure. The Boy, a youngster growing up in this violent and impoverished land. The boy listens with skepticism to stories about John, a martyred boy. Brigida or Brigitta, the priest's illegitimate daughter. Brigitta meets her father briefly during his stay at their village. Maria, the woman with whom the priest had a brief but extremely significant affair. Padre Jose, the only other priest in the novel besides the protagonist. Padre Jose opts to renounce his faith rather than flee the state or face execution. Mr. Tench, an Englishman living in Mexico and working as a dentist. Mr. Tench lives a life of apathy and vacancy. The Gringo, an American outlaw and the other haunted man in the novel, carrying an award of 500 pesos on his head. The Lairds, the German-American siblings living in Mexico and Lutherans by religion. Mr. Laird is the first to come upon the priest after he crosses the border. So these are all the characters in the novel. Now coming to the plot, or we can say it is actually divided into 3 parts, but I have cut down it into a single summary, and it's as follows. At the beginning of the novel, the priest is waiting for a boat that will take him out of the capital city. He is on the run from the police because religion has been outlawed in his state and he is the last remaining clergyman. While talking to a man named Mr. Tench, he is summoned to a dying woman's house and misses his boat. He hides out in a barn on the estate of a plantation owner befriending the owner's daughter. Forced to move on, he heads to a village in which he used to live and work as a pastor. There he meets Maria, a woman with whom he has had a brief affair, and Brigida, his illegitimate daughter. He spends the night in the town and wakes before dawn to say Mass for the villagers. The lieutenant, a sworn enemy of all religion, arrives at the end of Mass, leading a group of policemen in search of the priest. And the priest goes out to the town square to face his enemy. No one in the village turns him in. However, the lieutenant does not realize that he has found the man he is looking for. Instead, the lieutenant takes a hostage whom he says he will execute if he finds the villagers have been lying to him about the whereabouts of the wanted man. The priest heads to the town of Carmen, and on the way he meets a man known simply as the Mestizo. Uninvited, the Mestizo accompanies the priest on his journey, and it very soon becomes clear that he is an untrustworthy figure and most likely interested in following the priest so that he can turn him in and collect the reward money. The priest finally admits that he is indeed a priest, but Mestizo, who has become feverish by the second day of their journey together, does not have the strength to follow the priest when he veers off course. The priest knows that if he enters Carmen, he will surely be captured, and he lets the Mestizo ride on towards the town by himself. The priest then backtracks to the capital city. He is in disguise, wearing a drill suit, and he tries to procure a bottle of wine so he can say Mass. He meets a beggar who takes him to a hotel and introduces him to a man who says he can supply him with the wine. The man arrives and sells the priest a bottle of wine and a bottle of brandy. But taking advantage of the priest's offer to share a drink with him, the man proceeds to drink the entire bottle of wine, thwarting the priest's plan. The priest then leaves the hotel but is caught with the bottle of brandy by a state official. After a lengthy chase through the streets of the town, during which the priest unsuccessfully attempts to take refuge at the house of Padre Jose, he is caught and is taken to jail. In jail, he speaks with the prisoners, admitting to them that he is a priest. A pious woman in jail for having religious articles in her home argues with the priest. The next day, the priest is ordered to clean out the cells, and while doing so meets Mestizo again. But Mestizo decides not to turn the priest into the authorities. The priest has another face-to-face encounter with the lieutenant, but again goes unrecognized and is allowed to go free. The priest spends a night at the abandoned estate of the fellows and then moves on to an abandoned village. He meets an Indian woman whose son has been shot and killed by the gringo, an American outlaw who is also on the run from police. He accompanies the woman to a burial ground and then leaves her there. Fatigued and almost completely drained of the will to live, the priest staggers on, eventually coming upon a man named Mr. Lair, who informs him that he is out of danger, having crossed a border into a neighboring state where religion is not allowed. After spending a few days at the home of Mr. Lair, the priest prepares to leave for Las Casas. But before he can depart, the Mestizo arrives, informing him that the gringo has been mortally wounded by the police and is asking for someone to come and hear his confession. The priest, aware that he is walking into a trap, finally agrees to accompany the Mestizo back across the border. There he meets the gringo, who refuses to repent for his sins and then dies. Then, as expected, the lieutenant arrives and takes the priest into custody. The two men have a long conversation about their beliefs, and then when the storm front clears, the lieutenant takes the priest back to the capital city for his trial. On the night before the priest is to be executed, the lieutenant goes to the home of Padre Jose to see if he will come and hear the confession of the captured priest. Padre Jose refuses and the lieutenant returns to the police station with a bottle of brandy for the priest. That night, the priest tries to repent for his sins but finds he cannot. He wakes up the next morning afraid of the impending execution. The next day, Mr. Trench watches the execution from the window of the Jefferies office. Later that night, the boy hears about what happened to the priest and realizes that the man is a martyr and a hero. He dreams about him that night and wakes up to the sound of knocking at the door. Opening the door, he finds a man seeking shelter, and when the boy learns that the man is a priest, he swings the door wide open to let him in. So this is the summary of The Power and the Glory, written by Henry Graham Greene. Now moving on to the themes. The first one is the dangers of excessive idealism. An idealist is one who imagines that the world can be a much better place than it is. What could be dangerous about that? The lieutenant in many ways illustrates the danger obsessed with the way things could be done. He remains mired in dissatisfaction and bitterness about the way things actually are. Although the wish to help the poor is a noble sentiment, dreams are starting over, erasing history, and wiping out all religious belief are simply not realizable. The second one, the disparity between representation and reality. Greene is interested in showing the gap between life as it is remembered, recorded or retold, and life as it is lived. The most obvious example is the story of John, the young martyr. One thing that becomes apparent by the end of the novel is how very different John's story of martyrdom is from that of the priest. John's life is characterized from start to finish by composure, loyalty, and above all, unshakable faith. Although the priest is committed as far as his vocation is concerned, he is still afraid of death and unable to repent. The third is the interrelated nature of so-called opposites. Love and hate, beauty and suffering, good and evil are just a few of the many pairs of seeming opposites that Greene insists are not really opposites at all. The novel is a good example of plural ideological structure as it deals with different value systems conflicting with each other. And the last theme, the paradox of Christian humanity or humility. One of the most knotty problems considered in this book is how difficult it is for a Christian to be truly humble. Humility is a quality that a Christian is supposed to strive to realize in his life. Yet, as that person thinks that he is succeeding in being humble, he cannot become proud of his success. The priest realizes that he is trapped in this quagmire and that he originally stayed in Mexico during the persecution so that he would appear good before God and his people. Yet, in the novel, he never allows himself to remain complacent in the sacrifices he has made or the Christian feelings he has. Despairing over his weaknesses and inability to be truly humble, the priest paradoxically attains true humility. So these are the themes, and also we have motives. The motives are animals, half things, and abandonment. So as we have this into 3 chapters, I have cut it down and wrote it in a single page so that you can understand it and write in your exam very clearly. Thanks for watching.